Welcome to the Play Review with me, Douglas Schatz. Hello and welcome to the Play Review. I'm delighted to be joined today by Jodi Rilot, who is returning after our great conversation in the last episode about Somerset Maugham's The Circle and Noel Coward's Private Lives. Welcome back, Jodi. Thanks very much for coming back for more.
Hello. Well, thank you very much for having me.
Today, we're going to talk about The Motive and the Cue, which is currently running on the Littleton stage at the National Theatre and is one of the hottest tickets in town. There are numerous reasons why this show is so popular, I think, to do with the draw of heavyweight names involved, starting with the fact that the play is based on the story of two acting giants of the 20th century, Sir John Gielgud and Richard Burton, who came together to stage Hamlet on Broadway in 1964. And this was at a time when Burton had just married Elizabeth Taylor, and they were the most famous couple in the world. And Taylor, therefore, also features in the play. And then there's the casting, with Mark Gatiss and Johnny Flynn recreating Gielgud and Burton, respectively. And then the fact that the play is written by Jack Thorne, the amazingly prolific author for stage and screen. Thorne's credits include plays such as The Solid Life of Sugarwater, The End of History, Afterlife, and Harry Potter and the Cursed Child, no less, as well as the TV adaptation of Philip Pullman's Dark Materials and the powerful TV drama Help, which personalized the care home scandal during the COVID pandemic with Jodie Comer and Stephen Graham. I don't know whether you saw that, Jodi, but a fantastic piece of TV. As if these creatives are not enough, the show is directed by Sam Mendes. He, of films such as Skyfall, Revolutionary Road, and American Beauty, to single out a few favorites, as well as The Ferryman and the Lehman trilogy in the theater, so pretty heavyweight credits there. And finally, of course, we have the heavyweight figure of Hamlet himself and his creator, who contribute large parts of the play. So, which of these reasons most made you want to go to see this show, Jodi?
Oh, probably Jack Thorne.
Oh, really?
Yeah. In the first instance, I think I'd heard about it before I knew about the casting. So it will have been Jack Thorne. And then, of course, Sam Mendes. I love that these very successful cinema directors will still come back and do some theatre. So that was the other reason.
Mm-hmm. The story is fascinating, though, isn't it? The show takes us behind the scenes during the rehearsals for Hamlet, giving us a glimpse of what goes on for actors and directors as they find their way towards creating a show, and particularly Shakespeare, and more specifically focuses on the clashes between Gielgud and Burton as they navigate this process. Jack Thorne and we know more about what actually went on between them in real life in rehearsal, because one of the members of the original cast, Richard Stern, actually recorded some of the conversations that went on in the room. He actually had a tape recorder hidden in his bag during rehearsals.
That's brilliant.
Which he did confess to Burton and Gielgud at some point, and they apparently were okay with it, and later published a journal of these recordings and the notes he took. And there was another member of the cast who's also written in his memoirs about this time. Obviously, these were two very famous people coming together to do a very high-profile production. So there was great interest in that. And I wonder what you thought about these two characters and the way they come together.
Well, first of all, I loved Mark Gattis's portrayal of Gielgud. He just became him.
He nails it, doesn't he?
He nails it. And it's more than impersonation. Yes, it was accurate in terms of he seemed to somehow look like him. He just seemed to become him. It just felt like this incredibly truthful portrayal of this very repressed man who was wanting desperately, because it was a critical stage in his career as well.
Yeah.
Was his star now on the wane because Olivier was founding at the same time the National Theatre at the Old Vic? And wasn't Olivier at the same time directing Peter O'Toole as Hamlet in parallel?
Yeah, so there's a famous story that O'Toole and Burton made a bet or challenged each other to do Hamlet with either Olivier or Gielgud, and they flipped a coin as to who would do it with whom.
Nice.
And I don't know who thought they won, but O'Toole did it with Olivier and Burton did it with Gielgud.
Yeah, fascinating.
Crazy story.
It is a crazy story. And even if you don't know all of that, it stands just as a great play. So I thought that portrayal of Gielgud was incredible. Johnny Flynn I mean, how do you step into Richard Burton with that voice, that screen presence? And I thought he did it admirably. I thought he sounded like him. It was perhaps maybe more of an impersonation than, say, Mark Gatiss was, if I'm being very critical, but I thought he did a very, very good job of that. And the tensions between them, I think perhaps because also I had just come out of directing. So I particularly loved that wrangling in the rehearsal room. Burton being very cross with Gielgud for giving him a line reading rather than a note.
Yes.
Don't tell me how to say it, give me a proper note. And then the rest of the cast looking on with their breath held almost, watching these two greats. So if on paper you'd read it before you went in what it was about, you might have expected some enormous ego clash. It was way more subtle than that, I thought.
Yeah, it was. And I agree with you about Gatiss is absolutely wonderful as Gielgud, completely inhabiting the part. He gets his sort of patrician posture and his fruity diction that we recognize, as well as this scabrous wit, which he has famously, but also his underlying vulnerability, particularly the sadness about his career, because as you rightly said, it's a fascinating contrast, of course, between Gielgud and Burton as character types, but also in the trajectory of their careers. So Gielgud, having been one of the most famous and successful actors in the world, is on the decline. He actually says at some point during the play that he took this job because work was hard to find, which is hard to believe.
Yeah.
As opposed to Burton, who's, in the ascendancy, he's done Cleopatra and is with Elizabeth Taylor, but also that they're such different types, of course. So going back to Gatiss and Gielgud, that sadness about his career, but also his loneliness with his clandestine homosexuality. And there's quite an interesting scene where he picks up a male prostitute in New York and is in his hotel room by himself, by contrast to these multiple scenes where in Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton's hotel suite, where they're always full of people having parties, and Gielgud is very much the outsider.
Oh, that scene where he's taking the sex worker back to his room, I found that so moving, so poignant. It was really a beautiful little quiet moment, and they embrace, and my heart just ached for him.
Yes. And then Johnny Flynn, yes, hugely watchable.
Yeah.
Sexy and accomplished as Burton, I thought. He's not as rough, as cruel as I think the real man might have been. I don't know. He's just sort of softer and smaller and just less physically robust or vocally robust. So just missing a little bit of that edge, I think, overall. But actually, what I kept thinking through most of the show, I'd love to see Johnny Flynn's Hamlet.
Yes.
Because we get extracts of him doing speeches and actually come to a point, as you say, about the directing, because I'm in the middle of my rehearsals that I'm directing of A Doll's House at our local theater. And I also love the scenes behind the scenes, so to speak, of rehearsal and how a director explores the motivations for the characters, to find the motive in the cue, in fact.
Yeah.
And shapes the whole piece and the way they develop a vision of a concept, as Gielgud did for this show. But the dialogue that he and Burton have about the playing of Hamlet. I mean, Hamlet, I love this as well because Hamlet is essentially the Shakespeare play I know the best. I also did a podcast on Hamlet. So recognizing all of that and the discussion they're having, there's this wonderful scene, isn't there, where they discuss interpretations of Hamlet, and Burton delivers this over-the-top kind of shouty rendition of a soliloquy, and Gielgud stops him, and they have a talk about their respective relationships with their fathers, and then Gielgud guides him to channel his feelings about his father to do the speech again with a different personal motivation, which proves, of course, to be much more moving, and it's just brilliant to watch.
It is brilliant. Yeah, I mean, what a challenge for him as an actor to show that in that way and to not lay it on with a trowel, just to do it so beautifully subtly the way that he did. I thought that was really spectacular. I loved also the way their relative status in the room rose and fell when they were challenging one another, when Burton was pushing back on a line read or whatever. I was almost willing Gielgud to put him in his place, but he doesn't. In fact, every time he retreats, he steps back, he takes his seat, and he offers him the room. He offers the room back to Burton every time.
Yeah, and there's that terrible scene when Burton arrives drunk to rehearsal and then tries to hand out whiskey and soda to everybody.
At 11 a.m.
Yeah, and it's just that classic awkwardness. Everybody does not want to be there. They don't want him to be there. It's just excruciating, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
Ironically, this was an amazingly successful production. And that's one of the other interesting things about the contrast between Gielgud and Burton, which is that they're different types of actors and there's a different artistic style involved here. Of course, we have Gielgud, the classical Shakespearean actor with his discipline, and we have Burton, the sort of modernist, instinctive character, much more physical, and how they approach what they're doing. And of course, that's played out, as you said, in those exchanges between them, which is fascinating to watch too. I mean, the amount we've just talked about these two central figures, basically, for me, the play is it.
Yeah.
And whenever they're not doing that, then the rest of it pales by comparison, I felt.
Yeah.
I mean, what do you think, for example, the women? We have Liz Taylor on the stage.
So she's woefully underused and underwritten. So Tuppence Middleton, I love her as an actress. I think she is incredible. She didn't have terribly much to do, which was a great shame. And I thought we would have had more of her story around, her boredom, her being sidelined. It was insufficiently explored to make it worthwhile to have it in the piece. But then again, think, who else have you got on stage? You've got Janie D, woefully underused.
Yeah.
But then, I'm sorry, Mr. Shakespeare does this, doesn't he? So it is a little bit in parallel, because how often do you have these small parts for the women? In Macbeth, clearly Lady Macbeth is a great part, but she's barely on stage. So there was a little bit of parallel. And also in the play itself, in the story, quite a few of the actors have a chat with Gielgud and talk about the fact that they are very, very successful, quite top of their game actors, but they chose this bit part in this play in order to work with him and be around it. So again, in a way,
yes,
it sort of mirrored the story of the play, these bigger stars having terribly little to do, frankly.
That's very clever, actually, analysis to spot that. That's true. It does mirror that. I don't necessarily think that's to its advantage, though, ultimately, as the play, right? So you're right. I think that both those lead women are underused. Obviously, the scenes with Liz and Richard Burton give a glimpse into the crazy wealth and fame they live with, I suppose, which was sort of interesting. I like the scene where Liz and Gielgud have breakfast together to try and mend fences.
Yes, same.
But as you said with Janie D, she's allowed to give Gertrude's lengthy speech describing how Ophelia meets her death, which was completely superfluous as far as I could see.
Yes, it was.
It was just like they were giving her something to do. But frankly, there was no purpose to it in the plot of the play.
Yeah.
And actually, the rest of the cast is pretty similar. Any kind of scenes that involved them weren't really interesting enough. There was nowhere to go with it. They didn't take them anywhere. Even, I think it's the young William Redfield, who was desperate to learn how to be an actor and to advance his career from this experience. And he wants to get as much as he can out of Gielgud. But again, they was sort of introduced that, and it was there, but it never really went anywhere with any profound depth, I thought. So it's basically the heavyweights that we want to see, isn't it?
It is.
When they're together, that's it. That's the play. It sparkles.
Yeah, it does. It sparkles. And there was lots of clever things. I liked the way Sam Mendes' cinematic view comes into it in lots of ways. That was so beautifully done. I love when the black curtain, such as its curtain, came down and action would take place in front of the curtain that might be a rehearsal scene from the play. I actually really liked that. It kind of gave it a little vignette interruption to what could be, actually, if it was just the intensity of the rehearsal room, probably would have been too much. I liked that every little scene was headlined in white subtitles on black with a quote from the play that was beautifully interwoven. And, I went with my 18-year-old son, who is also an actor, and he's not particularly familiar with Hamlet, and he'd pretty much no clue who Richard Burton and John Gielgud were, but keen to see it because of the writer and because of the director. And he thoroughly enjoyed it. And it was quite long. I felt like the first, up until the interval, it was a slow burn. At the interval, I was like, yeah, it's good. I'm definitely enjoying it, but it was in that second half that it really picked up the momentum, and it ends on this gloriously melodramatic looking out into the footlights finish with the skull held aloft. I mean, I defy anybody to have not been uplifted by that, even though as it was happening, I was thinking I'm being manipulated to feel exhilarated here, but it didn't matter because I felt exhilarated.
Yeah. Well, that was the cinematic image, I think, as well. And the audiences absolutely love it. They're on their feet at the end.
Yeah.
I agree with you about the first and second halves in the sense I found the opening scene, for example, was a bit dull. There were 15 of them on the stage sitting around the rehearsal table, and it takes some time to get going.
Mm.
And the person sitting next to me actually turned to me and said, "What do you think?" at the interval? I said, "Yeah." And that's when I said, I'd love to see Johnny Flynn do Hamlet, because that's what I was really intrigued by, was their performances.
Yeah.
But you're right about also that curtain and the kind of blurring of what is rehearsal and what is the real thing. And then what was interesting is that in reality, Gielgud's concept for the production was that it would be set in a rehearsal room. They would wear rehearsal clothing, so you wouldn't really know whether this was a rehearsal or the real thing. And therefore, when you're watching those little vignettes in front of the thing, you're thinking, oh, this might be the actual production.
Yes, of course.
Or is this the rehearsal? Or are they just rehearsing somewhere else? Or I thought that was great too. So one of the things I just love about it is it's basically a love letter to the theater too, isn't it?
Yeah, 100%. In fact, what my son said to me at the interval was, I do quite like a play or a film that insists on itself. And I thought, yeah, that is it. He likened it to a play version of Cinema Paradiso. What that does for film, this does for theatre.
Well, as lovers of theatre, we couldn't but love it.
I couldn't but love it.
The Motive and the Cue runs at the National Theatre until the 15th of July. So you have time. However, tickets are like gold dust. But there may always be returns, and every Friday at 1 p.m., the National releases some rush tickets. So go if you can. It's a highly enjoyable theatrical event. Jodi, it's been great fun talking to you about this show today. What have you got lined up to see at the theatre in the coming weeks?
So a lot, as you'd expect. I've got The Pillarmen coming up. Martin McDonagh, not my favourite playwright. Find him funny but brutal.
Yeah.
But again, going with my son, who's a big fan. I'm going to see The Swell, which I'm very excited about seeing at the Orange Tree by, is it Isley Lynn? I'm not sure how you pronounce her name. I saw her play Skin a Cat at the Bunker Theatre years and years and years ago before that closed. So I'm really excited to see that one. I'm going to see Guys and Dolls at the Tower Theatre for the second time.
Oh, you must have liked it.
I did like it. I was sat in the stalls and was envious of the groundlings.
Yes. So are you now going to go and immerse yourself?
I am. I'm going to put on my very comfortable pair of trainers and wrestle my way to the front and be right in it. I've also got tickets to go and see Your Doll's House, which I'm very excited to see.
Oh, thank you very much. That's very kind. That's the first week of July.
Yeah.
I'm definitely also going to see The Pillarman, and I'd love to talk about Martin McDonagh. I'd love to do the play podcast about that play, certainly. I've got tickets for Romeo and Juliet at the Almeida.
Is that Rebecca Frecknell's?
It is Rebecca Frecknell, who's just done Streetcar Named Desire, and she's brilliant. And I'm also looking forward to seeing the new adaptation of Dario Fo's Accidental Death of an Anarchist, which is transferring from the Lyric in Hammersmith to the West End shortly. I missed it at the Lyric.
I missed it at the Lyric.
Got great reviews. Jodi, thank you so much. It's been a delight. And let's do it again.
Yeah, let's definitely. Thoroughly enjoyed that.
Thank you, everyone, for listening to the Play Review. We'll see you next time. Thanks for listening. I'd love to hear what you think. So please visit patreon.com/theplaypodcast to share your views on this production or any other play that you've seen. See you next time.